Hans Johnson. I'm the director of the George Brown Legacy Project, and it does my heart good, and it does, I'm sure, the heart of George's widow, Marta Brown, good to see all of you here today. And I want to start by recognizing someone who, in her own right, is a public servant of great stature, someone who carries on her husband's tradition of coalition building, and someone who, without whom, this project in memory of her late husband would be impossible, and that's Marta Brown. I feel very privileged to have walked in some of the footsteps of George Brown over the last 3 years in trying to retrace this story and trying to retrace his public service from his earliest days in the Imperial Valley to his time in Redlands here as a teenager to his work in Los Angeles and City Hall in his 20s, going back to UCLA to his teens and then his early 20s, rekindling some of the people who knew George at UCLA and who carry on his public service there, the likes of Rick Tuttle. People who honor George Brown still today in Oregon near Cascade Locks, where George Brown said, with much derision, that he was sent to manicure the forest as a conscientious objector to World War II, but in a very remote outpost to the east of Portland, where the barracks still stand. Much of the camp burned down, but George Brown, true to his ethos, started a library there at the conscientious objector internment camp there in rural Oregon, and from which he left actually to enlist and join the military in 1944. But all along the path in Washington, D.C., where I lived for 18 years and where people still revere George, where the National Academy of Sciences library is named after George Brown, his legacy lives on. And no place more deeply rooted than here in the Inland Empire. Here, where in San Bernardino people often refer to their county as the dumping ground of so much of California's waste and what California wants to forget, but which, like Riverside County, is rising from that tragic history of neglect and of environmental injustice to try to seize a future of recognizing its diversity and of honoring pathways of opportunity and advancement which George Brown sought to champion. No less than CSU San Bernardino, where George is still revered and where his legacy burns on. But also here in Riverside, where we see around us some of the richness of the agricultural terrain and the industry left here, but also the inequality that still surrounds us, which drove George Brown nuts, but drove him to public service and to bring people into opportunity through education, through public service, through good jobs with a right to organize and a right to access to collective bargaining agreements that would be heeded rather than scorned by major employers. That we live here in the shadow of George Brown, still seeking to carry on his vision, but also to protect his legacy, and to use that legacy in the form of his archives as a springboard into greater recognition of his public service and what it could mean for the next generation. One last thing, because it deserves recognition alongside George's other accomplishments, but because of George's many accomplishments, sometimes it gets short shrift. And that was George's championing of a cleaner environment here in California and nationwide. But George Brown first worked at the state of California level when he was in the legislature in 1958, 59, 60, and 61 to get lead banned from paint and from gasoline. He worked at the state level to do that. And then he took it nationwide. And for 20 years, after joining Congress in 1963, George worked to get lead out of gasoline and paint, ultimately succeeding with the final regulation in 1983, when no lead gas became standardized. So there's someone here who has joined us from many miles away, someone who in his own way carries on the George Brown spirit, and in whom the flame of public service still burns very bright. A 7-time Emmy Award winner.
Oh no. You can't do that.
And someone who keeps the George Brown spirit of labor activism, of civil liberties politics, and of progressive coalition building alive, and that is the great Ed Asner.
And that's a fantastic speech you gave that man. And I hope, whether he's in hell or heaven, that he somehow got to hear it, because I've never heard a more beautiful encomium, and you should publish that too.
Thank you.
I thank you for.
I thank all of you once more for coming out, but please give all that you can to help realize this goal. We are really onto something very important here, as Ed said, and we are crossing the halfway point in our work to get this done. So I really appreciate your generosity. Some of you are repeat givers. Thank you. I can't guarantee this won't be the last time that we ask you for help. So stay with us, but we're trying to get this job done, and you know what a lasting font of information and of pedagogy, of teaching the next generation of leaders and of students and scholars and reporters about George Brown that we have in these archives.